Good morning, everyone, and welcome again to the JBDC Virtual Biz Zone. And this week we're going to continue part two of our presentation that we started 2 weeks ago on smart agro-processing. And so this morning we are going to be focused on agile resilience in trade, strategies to sustain productivity in disruption. And our presenter this morning remains Mr. Colin Porter. He is our technical services manager. And so, without further ado, I am going to hand over to him, only to say, however, that the session is being recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel later on this week, just in case you know somebody that wanted to join but is unable to do so. Feel free to interact in the chat, ask your questions, and overall enjoy the session. Over to you, Colin.
Thank you very much, Xancia, and a very good morning to all. Hope everyone is doing fine. Now, firstly, forgive me for not having my camera on. This computer refuses to turn on the camera for whatever reason. Maybe it knows better than I do. Don't want to shock anybody this morning with my looks. But anyway, it's important that you're seeing the presentation. Can you just confirm that you're seeing the screen?
Yes, Colin, we're seeing it.
All right, thank you. Right, so as Cynthia mentioned, this is a follow-up to the first session that we did a couple of weeks ago that focused a little bit on strategic modernization through technology and finance, with a lot of emphasis on the technology side and so on. So this morning, we're going to build on top of that and just to really say that I don't think, at least I hope I'm not teaching anything that is totally new to you, but just to kind of reinforce some of what we already have known and experienced in our years in as agro-processors, and to give a different perspective and stimulate some thoughts and conversation as we go along. Of course, a lot of this is in the context. We're not very explicit with it, but in terms of what we have experienced over the last few years in terms of the type of disruptions that we have encountered in the form of hurricanes in particular, devastating hurricanes. But we know there are many types of disruptions. And, you know, in a state like Jamaica, as a developing country, we know that we have to brace ourselves for disruptions from time to time. So today, we're going to talk about some strategies and some ways in which we can look at mitigating against some of these disruptions when they do occur, and how we can ensure that our businesses remain sustainable, that we ensure that we are, on the growth trajectory, even though we may slow down a bit, but we're still pointing in that general direction. So this morning, I'm going to be focusing on why we must embrace smarter production, what I call extreme efficiency, to move towards efficiency. There's a lot of talk in the air now about our need to improve productivity and efficiency and so on. And also going to look at strategic resource security, right? How can we secure those resources that we have, which enables us to have a business, be able to supply the market with our products and services and so on. So we're going to focus on some of these areas this morning. Now, let's set the backdrop for today's talk, right? Now, obviously, this is obvious that the vulnerabilities that we have will impact the growth of our sector, right? Whether these come from what we call climate and supply shocks. So disasters, we talk a lot about the hurricanes, but we know what drought conditions can also do as well when they do happen. A lot of us rely on suppliers locally to provide us with our basic raw materials or the different type of crops and herbs and spices and what have you that go into our products. And we know how sensitive it is at times when we go through these particular disasters or these climatic conditions that impact the availability of our raw materials. So we know that's something that we face with on a regular basis. There are other shocks that we deal with on a regular basis that sometimes they don't even feel like shocks anymore. We're in a constant phase and we have learned to adapt it. Of course, we're talking about the high utility rates, electricity in particular. Um, Also, the supply of them, what happens when there is no public supply of electricity or water? What do we do? And I've included here fragile logistics networks. How do we move our products, our inputs, our outputs from point A to point B, right? What happens when there's a delay in getting in our packaging material? What happens when you can't get anyone to move your stuff to a warehouse or to the airport or to the wharf or wherever in time? And the clock is going off on your products because they have a set lifetime, shelf life, and disruptions can make the difference between you having a shipment reaching its destination or having to dump a set of products. So these are some of the challenges that we face on a regular basis in our businesses, and how do we mitigate against these? What strategies can we put in place so that we can remain as agile and productive as possible? Now, in putting together a presentation, I came across some numbers, and whereas I don't have a particular study that I've seen from different areas and different numbers, ranging from as low as 20 to 25%. But it is said that in countries such as Jamaica, we may lose up to 40% of crops to waste. And I found it to be a jarring figure, right? And and this is waste in different kind of ways. Whether it is wasted in the field because there's a glut and there aren't enough buyers, so the farmers will get rid of it. Is there a waste by the time it gets to your facility and some are bruised and you have to discard? Variety of reasons, right? And it is a lot of times the result of not having adequate or proper storage. So things aren't kept at the right conditions and they go bad. Whether there isn't enough processing capacity out there for particular things, so the volume sit there for a long time and take a long time to go through processing, and so they get spoiled. With not having non-optimized preservation technologies, right? So a variety of reasons why our raw materials may go to waste. And this is a vulnerability. This is something that we can even put under the umbrella of a type of disaster, really, although it is sometimes be able to be controlled by us, but it is something that we get faced with from time to time. So moving towards standardized production inputs and processing immediately post-harvest can help us to stabilize supply while transforming highly perishable produce into value-added inputs for additional processing. And I'll talk some more about this later on in the presentation. This is something that is solvable with relative ease, but it also takes coordination, takes cooperation with many parties involved for us to bring this number down, right? Because a number like this in terms of waste should not be what we are contending with. And a common theme in today's presentation is how we can reduce waste. To be agile, to be able to respond quickly to any kind of disaster or disruption that we may have requires us to minimize waste actively throughout our systems. Now, let's look at what I call some pillars of resilient processing. What are some of the key areas that we need to pay attention to make our processing resilient, as agile, allow us to respond to any kind of changes negatively in the system for us to maintain productivity, right? So this is what I'll be talking about mainly today. So let's look at the three areas that we'll be delving in somewhat. The first I call supply resiliency. How do we ensure that our supply chains are as resilient, as robust, as much as possible, right? So it's about mitigating shortages through different strategies with those in our supply chain. Um, how do we respond when the supply has dried up? How do we manage inventories to ensure that we can continue production with the least amount of disruption? Look at the whole network of where our supplies come from. And I know this may impact other aspects of the product in terms of even flavor and taste, depending on where and the variety of raw material input you put in. So, of course, there are those factors to consider, but how do we put in a network, put in a system to allow us to ensure that our supply stream is as robust as possible? Same thing goes towards other inputs we have, our packaging solutions and so on, right? But we'll dig into that a little bit more. The next pillar we're going to be talking a little bit about, and we touched on some of that in the previous presentation 2 weeks ago. But how do we use technology now to allow us to be as responsive, as agile, to be able to get back up if there are any disruptions, right? What technologies can assist us in these areas? And then thirdly, I want to introduce an area here about lean and green methods. Now, the world is moving towards green business, green solutions, how we can be in harmony with the environment as much as possible. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And also lean, which is a whole series of methods of waste reduction. How can we reduce waste so that we trim all the fat, so as they say, so we can maximize our profits, we can optimize our cost inputs, and so on. So we're going to talk about that and look at it in the context of even a little bit of the markets. I won't talk too much about the markets and so on, but I'll just wrap it up around the context of that as part of our ability to remain resilient as well and to look at options. So let's go back to the first pillar here now, supply chain resiliency. Here, what immediately comes to mind is the ability for us to secure our raw material flow whenever we have disruptions such as tropical storms, hurricanes, and so on. But of course, we also speak about the opposite end of the scale, where we have droughts which affect the supply of certain raw materials as well. And as producers, and again, if you have a point, feel free to raise your hand, or we can discuss later on in the question and answer section about some of your ideas. I'd love to hear how some of you handle such situations when you have disruptions, which especially when you have island-wide disruptions here, we're talking about at that scale. How do you manage to secure inputs in the shortest possible time to get back up and running, right? But typically, these are just some suggestions I'm putting forward here, how we can mitigate against these disruptions. Looking at diversification, and it says geographical diversification here, but really it's about supplier diversification. And geographic because we anticipate that a particular region may suffer losses and you can't get anything from there, especially if it's an area known for particular crops. Are there alternatives? So we know with Hurricane Melissa last year, we lost a lot of production on the western side, especially, although other parishes in the central and eastern parts also got damaged. So is it possible if you had a supplier, let's say, between Westmoreland and St. Elizabeth? Is there an alternate supplier in Portland or St. Mary who could supply similar raw material inputs for you? How do you get to those persons? How do you know them? How do you reach them early enough so that by the time you hear about them and you get to them, someone else has already gotten to them, right? So it's about building up and looking at all of that. Contract farming, as well as safety stock integration. So I have here some information on each, right? So as I said, the first one in terms of geographical diversification, it is about building up a network of raw material suppliers who supply the same item, but you may want to have these alternatives available whenever there is disruption. And this happens not only in times of disruption, but even in your normal production cycles. You should look at having alternatives, backups to be able to provide you with a steady flow of raw materials. Similarly, with your packaging material, whether you source locally or from overseas, what strategies can you put in place? So if the ports are down for a period of time, how can I ensure that I can secure supply of my packaging material? Or some other consumable that I may use with my equipment and so on. So you really want to do some research and ensure that you identify and have relationships with multiple suppliers. You may not have to be patronizing them or taking from them consistently throughout, but you want to know that they're available and you can use them um, whenever the need arises. In terms of contract farming, again, this is about, and I'm sure many of you would already have relationships with particular um, farmers already, but just to ensure that you have some kind of formal relationship to lock you into supply of products over a period of time, right? Building these relationships is important so that you have the trust and the consistency coming from them. They understand your needs, and this really feeds into your final product. And it can really drive the competitiveness of your product. You may lock into prices. You may lock into minimum quality of the raw material that they're supplying, right? Certain delivery times, delivery volumes, that type of thing. You want to be able to have this on the table, have this negotiated, and become a part of your whole um, value chain flow into your products. And you want to do this with all of your suppliers. So it's not just an informal arrangement you have with them, right? So you want to look at that and ensure that you nurture these relationships as much as possible to ensure that you are as you're 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 you minimize downtime wherever possible. And in cases where they can't supply, at least they would be able to inform you ahead of time, inform you early, so you can start making alternative arrangements whenever they themselves may have disruptions. Because you have to also recognize that in situations, your own supplier will have their own challenges, have their own struggles, and so communication is important so that you may be able to put your plan Bs in action as soon as possible. And the third area is what I call safety stock integration. And this is about having reserves of key inputs that you know are the most sensitive to disruption, the most vulnerable, so that you will always have some of these on hand, especially whether it is a seasonal issue or some other unpredicted event that prevents you from getting supplies of this. And this is where we often face the challenge of perishable materials. I know in our processing, we like to start production with the freshest of inputs, just pick yesterday, just pick early this morning, so we preserve the freshness and so on. But what happens when it's not available fresh? We have to now look whether we do it ourselves or we enter into arrangements with our suppliers or someone or this. And I always say this is a big opportunity for a lot of persons to go in, where we can convert some of these perishable materials into a state that can preserve all the qualities of the item, but extend the shelf life a bit so that it can be stored, can be put in storage for a period of time and pulled out and used in production and maintaining the quality. So we think about dehydrating certain inputs, all the various herbs and spices and stuff that we use in our sauces. And some people do it. We know pepper mash is something that is being done. Having things in the forms of concentrates and purees, having some temperature control storage. So we can have that. And I'll talk some more about this when we'll speak about technology in a couple of slides down. But, and I'll use one item as an example, which people tend to have challenges with from time to time, not just during major natural disruptions, but through because of seasonality or other factors. And that's sorrel and even pepper sometimes, right? There are times when persons who rely or who depend on sorrel as a major input into their products can't get enough, right? But there are technologies that can allow us to dehydrate it or freeze dry it or what have you to keep it in a state that retains all the properties, the color, the flavor, the aroma, you name it, and so on. So if imagine someone has that a warehouse full of sorrel, oh man, you things would be nice for you in times of shortage, right? So just looking at ways like that, how we can ensure that we have some security when it comes to our raw materials and to utilize modern techniques on how to ensure that we minimize stockouts of these items or suppliers being able to minimize or maximize availability, make the availability of these products continuous throughout the year. Right. So segueing right into to the production side of things is having the type of technology in place that allows you to respond very quickly. And the beautiful thing about being in the year 2026 is that a lot of these technologies are right at our fingertips. They are not difficult to acquire anymore. They are affordable. The range of technology is very wide, and easily acquired, relatively speaking, from various suppliers, right? We know that as an agro-processor, survival means to be agile. You have to be agile to survive, right? And agility leads to survival. So responding to change in customer demand and disruptions require the ability to pivot quickly, to adapt to new realities, and to minimize downtime in such situations. And the example I was just alluding to earlier, about converting your perishables to a form that gives it some extra life without compromising on quality, um, is something that really we should be looking to integrate into our facilities in our processes, and just use the process of freeze drying, which has been around for a long time, but we're now seeing more and more freeze drying equipment becoming available in various capacities, from tabletops up to huge um, equipment that can facilitate process over 100 kilograms at any one go, being made available. And the illustration on the slide to the right there just shows that the steps that it goes through, from selection of your fruit or your other product. You go through your usual storing and pre-washing, and then it goes through the process of preparation, going through the freeze drying process, and so on. And for those of you who may not be familiar with it, what freeze drying does, which the name sounds like a contradiction, but it literally, when you freeze the item, the process allows you to extract as much moisture as possible, once it is in the form, in a frozen form, and then the process removes all of that water, that ice from the item. And the difference between that and regular dehydration is that it tends to preserve the item in its natural form more. Can't explain all the science right now, but it retains the color of the item, it retains the flavor, it retains the texture, everything. Whereas with dehydration, you realize when you dehydrate some stuff, they tend to get a little bit leathery, the color may change and it darkens, and so on. With freeze drying, none of that happens. It retains the thing exactly. The only thing that is removed is water. Freeze dried stuff tend to be a little bit crispier and a little more delicate in terms of its being able to crumble and so on, right? But it is a technology which is now being used more and more, and this is something you can look at to minimize or to deal with the issue of when you have a break in supply of your products, and other technologies exist in other areas of processing. The use of steam jacketed kettles, which is something that people have been using for the longest while, for pasteurization, when you're making your sauces and your beverages and so on, right? So you want to go out there, you want to explore what equipment is there that can support me being a little bit more agile. What can I introduce in a relatively easy way to improve my processing, to minimize any kind of downtime or waste I may have in my process to make my products. And
Colin, can I interject 1 second, please? There are
sure,
two
Cynthia.
questions in the chat that I want you to answer for me.
Okay, sorry, let me look at them.
Yes, no, I'll read them for you. So one person is asking, does JBDC or SRC offer freeze drying and packaging facilities for small operators, especially considering the cost of freeze dryers? Can you respond to that for me,
Right.
please?
I can't say for certainty about SRC. At JBDC, we are actively trying to get a freeze dryer. We recognize the need of it, and we recognize the cost for the average micro or small processor out there. So we are actively in the process of sourcing a freeze dryer ourselves. To answer that particular question, as such, I can't tell the cost as yet, but most likely it will be in line with the typical costs that we have in place for other equipment in our agro incubator, which most likely will be charging a few $100s per hour to utilize it, but that can only be confirmed when we have the equipment in place. But certainly, based on our pricing model, we will make it affordable for our um our agro processors out there.
All right, one more question.
Yes.
Somebody wants to find out if there's any recommendation on decent dehydrators for sorrel or peppers.
Peppers. Right. There
Yes.
are some we have. I don't have the information on hand here. We have a dehydrator here, I think a 28 shelf or something like that. Can't remember the capacity right now, but that's information we can share with you. So if in the chat you could also just send an email to myself or Sam. So if you want to do it privately or in the public chat here, fine. And so I can have someone get back to you and make a specific recommendation for you.
All right. So, Miss Jamaican Herbs, you can just send your email address. Okay, I got the
Okay,
email
we got
address,
it
so I'll
there.
share it with
Yes.
you. All right, you can go ahead now,
All right,
Colleen.
thanks. Yeah, man. Right. So thanks for those questions and comments. And just to follow up on this part, we at JBDC, our team, we have a team of food processors and production engineers who can help in this regard. And I was just about to say that, one of the things that we can do is visit your facility or have a consultation session with you, discuss where you are, what needs you have, what gaps you may have, and we can kind of make some recommendations, come and do an assessment at a facility and start the conversation with you to help you to identify some of these gaps and make some suggestions on how you can do it in a way which isn't necessarily that prohibitive as well. But of course, that is relative. And if not, like the question was asked, we can facilitate you in our incubator. So hopefully, knocking on wood, before the end of the year, we should have our own freeze dryer in place. Now, when we talk about technology, of course, I'm just carrying through. I always like to say that everything is technology. Even if you have a grater that you use by hand and rub off your knuckles when you're grating the coconut, that is technology, right? However, we like to encourage and we often guide persons in getting the appropriate technology and technology that will move the needle on productivity a bit in terms of your output for the effort that you put in, that the output um is maximized as much as possible, right? And no equipment covered up the whole span. So you can get dehydrators which are Wi-Fi enabled. So you can set the settings and monitor its operation on your phone without running to stand up in front of the machine each time, right? You have different levels of control where you automate some type of equipment, be it fillers or some other type of piece of equipment out there. So just knowing what your facility can accommodate is also very important, right? Obviously, and this is something that we already would have known that you want to look out for equipment that are made from some material which are food safe and can be certified by the relevant authorities. Typically, things made from stainless steel, Teflon, some types of plastics, and so on, especially areas that come into contact with your ingredients are important. For new equipment, they tend to come with more efficient motors, which use less energy, right? Inverter type motors and so on. They run very quieter. They require less energy. However, of course, the maintenance part is important across the board for all equipment. How easy it is to maintain your equipment. Are there persons available who can maintain it for you? Ease of operation also is very important. That the controls and information, the dials, the labeling on the equipment are easily understood. And I like to caution persons who buy equipment from China and it comes with instructions in Chinese. Please ensure that you fully understand what everything means and if others are operating it, if you could replace the Chinese um, writing with English so that someone else who comes and looks at and is going to operate the machine will not push the wrong button in error, right? So as much as possible to make those changes, because you may not be the only one operating the machinery and so on. Look at the safety features of the machine, generally speaking. Does it have guards and so on? Do not remove the guards off the machine. They are there for a purpose. The availability of parts and persons who can repair the machines in case they go down are also important. I also like to encourage, this is a very expensive um, recommendation, but we find very important, especially for smaller pieces of equipment you have. Please have some what we call redundancy in place. So if you have a blender, a handheld blender, immersion blender, or small tools like that, have an extra one put down somewhere. Because a lot of times when you least expect it, you get some big orders and running and the blender, the motor run hot and overheat and conk out on you. Production stops. Or something breaks in there, production stops. Have a replacement or have access to a replacement immediately that you can continue production. Obviously, you can't do that with all piece of equipment you have because space and cost, but where possible, try and have some replacement piece of equipment or backup equipment rather in place should you have any kind of problems going on, right? So those are some considerations when it comes to the use of technology, the use of equipment, and so on. Now, technology also, especially today, is moving beyond the equipment you use in your production of your products. But in the digital age, managing the various processes in your operations is now moving towards digital to make us more efficient. So it could be controlling or managing the flow of your sales orders, of your inventory, of managing and scheduling your production, of your distribution, of your accounting, and so on, right? And JBDC was running a whole series of digitization training, which I hope most of you would have participated in. And there are many tools out there available. Some don't really cost you anything. Some you may have to pay subscriptions for, but when you look at it, the benefit you get from some of these inputs. And here I just want to focus on what we describe as manufacturing software. You have what they call ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning, which looks at everything from customer management to inventory management to production planning to resource planning, your human planning, and so on. These are oftentimes we hear about these, we think, oh, these are for big companies like Grace Kennedy and Lasco and all those who have hundreds of people and thousands of products coming off at the line every hour. But they have created different versions of these softwares for smaller manufacturers to help to manage their process. So this now helps you to move from having bits of paper all over the place that you have to spend time manually write up and pass information from one person to the next, where it can be automated, can be digitized, and accessed by persons immediately. And the wonderful thing about it, it creates and files and stores your records immediately, efficiently. You can recall it quite easily. And we can talk about some of these afterwards and so on. But I would encourage persons to look at this, to move in this direction as well. And you think about disruption. Don't like to use extreme examples, but you have a situation in your facility and you have some disruption and there is some damage to your facility. Some of the things that tend to be most vulnerable are records. We lose a lot of records for whatever reason. Having them software based, digitally based, means most likely they're going to be stored to the cloud, especially if you use one of the available solutions out there where you pay a subscription for, or you may even have a free version. Most likely you're going to be storing them in the cloud. Nobody don't store nothing on CD and floppy disk and all kind of thing anymore, right? It means that you can retrieve the information, access the information anywhere, anytime. So your information is safe. So getting back up and running after the disruption becomes much easier. It helps you with your in other areas as well, with planning, with getting your records together to access support from someone or somewhere else who may require certain information from you, right? So having this information in a digital format is good. It really helps us to um, move very rapidly in a very agile way. And ultimately, it can help us to even manage and save costs and time in our businesses and help us to focus on more other critical areas, right? When once these areas become routine. So this is another area with technology. It moves just beyond the equipment, but also to your operations. The other area of technology which is getting thrust into the spotlight again is energy, smart energy technologies, right? And the most obvious one is the use of solar energy or some form of alternative energy and so on. And we saw this, we are still seeing this post Melissa, where persons are looking at ways in which we can rely less on the public grid to ensure continuity. And so here, and we see a schematic of how a typical solar powered system is set up. Again, like other piece of equipment, it is so easy, relatively speaking, to access and install um, solar systems today, right? You have many suppliers locally. You have a whole lot of equipment coming from overseas fairly easily, from the solar panels to the charge controllers, the batteries, the inverter to power, whether it's going to be one section of your facility or your entire facility. Of course, the cost is scalable depending on the size facility system you're putting in place to power certain types of equipment. We know that in agro-processing, you use a lot of heavy powered equipment. So putting your entire system on a solar system may be prohibitive at first, but perhaps you can take some of the lighter stuff off the grid that are critical to the operations, your offices, maybe some of the smaller packaging machines, maybe some of the smaller stuff, depending on what it is that you're doing. And the beauty about having maybe like a solar system is that even outside of the period of disruption, it allows you to control your costs some more. So you can run some stuff off the grid, right? And reduce that cost. Or you alternatively, even while running on the grid, you look at things like demand side management. As you know, JPS for commercial industrial customers are charged different rates. So make sure you're on one of the industrial or commercial rate and not a residential rate. Look at running certain equipment depending on your scheduling, the ability to schedule and operate outside of certain hours, run off-peak hours, right? When the load is less, so the demand on the system is less, and you end up paying a more competitive rate um, than you normally would. So look at strategies like that. There are other smart technologies you can put in, having um, sensors, light sensors, so that light comes off when nobody's in a particular room. You can control devices remotely as well. Monitor the usage of energy as you go along, and so on. So there are a lot of options available now to use technology to manage energy in your facility. Um, of course, here at JBDC, we like to tell persons that before you just jump, however, and invest in any alternative form of energy, is that you should start with an energy audit, right? The audit will allow you to identify opportunities for savings that can be done before spending a cent through behavioral changes, through improving efficiencies, through changing out of certain um, devices or lighting in your facility, simply putting in LED bulbs instead of fluorescent or incandescent can cut some savings. Behavioral changes such as not leaving machines running unattended for long periods of time, or leaving lights on in areas where the light isn't required, can give you some saving. Looking at things like drips in our facility. It may not be energy in the sense that you think of it, but it is also part of your utilities that you have to pay, and how you manage all of these particular areas. So start with an audit, look at where you're safe, because even putting in a solar system, you still have to manage that usage. Um, or you think about cycle times and the longevity of your system, the maintenance of it, and so on, right? And right, and someone, thanks for that, Sylvia, who made a comment in the chat about the off-peak hours thing is real. So there it is, a real testimony there, and so on, right? So these are little things that we can um easily do to manage how we do things, so that when we invest finally in the solar and other forms of energy, we know we're using it efficiently, because ultimately to be agile is also to look at being as efficient as possible. It gives you that sense of discipline to be able to respond to changes. It allows you to see when there are anomalies in your systems, when you think agile and you think efficient, and so on, right? To allow you to respond quickly to changes. Right. So that's it from the point of view of technology for now. Um, and this here just kind of summarizes some particular areas we have on the table here: our water supply, product storage, maintenance, backup power. At the basic level, we know we get water from NWC, but one resilience target could be to have rainwater harvesting and tanks. and so on. A lot of us have tanks, but we really don't rainwater harvest whenever the rains are here. And we should look at making that something deliberate. And always rainwater is something that Jamaicans have been doing from day one, right? But how do you know integrate it into a proper system? Having tanks, having the filtering system, so for the water coming in, deciding based on level of filtering what you're using that water for, which has been rain harvested. Is it just for washing up your raw materials and washing out the facility? Is it can it be cleaned enough to be used in the production process itself? Right? Of course, we know whenever we have droughts, that's a different situation. And how do you balance, having that capacity to minimize times of drought and how you get water in those periods as well. Of course, we spoke a little bit about product storage for those that we can convert, having some temperature control rooms, and which is important, whether it is a cold room or just having it at the right temperature to ensure that spoilage is minimized and so on. Of course, in Jamaica, we have to balance our inventory levels with production demand and availability and so on, because inventory, generally speaking, is a cost which we try to keep to a minimum, but it has to balance with availability as well. So you want to look at that. And I alluded to a little bit about maintenance and some strategies earlier, but typically we deal with the reactive type maintenance, right? We fix when broken. Now you should look towards some kind of routine maintenance or preventative maintenance. Here, the resilient target says to have a preventative um, operating procedure schedule, which means you don't overwork your machine and feel, yeah, man, this machine just running and running and running and never let me down yet. Ever so often, check the motors, check something. It's simply as maybe just cleaning out the machine, lubricating it, checking blades and so on, ensure that blades are sharp, right? You would be amazed to know that a machine that uses a blade to cut or pulverize something, if dull, is not an efficient machine, because you have to run the machine longer to get the desired amount of chopping, which running longer means the motor running for a longer period of time, the motor getting hot, you probably burn out something in the motor before it should, and you overwork the machine. But if you took time once every 3 months, once every 6 months, you take the blades off, get someone to sharpen them, it works efficiently. You do your chopping in a fraction of time and you move on. So production is optimized, your output is increased, your cost is reduced. Simple things like that, right? And so you want to look at each piece of equipment that you have, no matter how small and insignificant it may seem, right? You want to ensure that you have some maintenance, right? We just spoke about backup power not too long ago. So having some kind of hybrid solar system in place and ensuring that it provides you with the type of input you have there. And here it says, well, the outcome could be to save cold chain integrity during outages. So, which is a famous one. Lights gone, you have a whole bunch of stuff in your freezers and your refrigerators or your cold room. Ooh, the challenge is to keep them as cool as long as possible before they start going bad. So obviously, one of the things you want to think about when you're scaling your solar system is, does it have the capacity to run my refrigerators or my freezers or cool room for a prolonged period of time, for how many days or what have you? Of course, um, you would have your battery capacity and your charging capability to ensure that the batteries are adequately charged and can sustain until you get your regular power supply back on board, right? So these are just some areas that we speak about resilience. Note I haven't spoken anything infrastructure about the building itself or thing like that. That is a whole different kind of thing. That is a different ball game, really, which is very important if we're talking about being resilient and having the type of assurance during disruptions that our facilities are safe. So obviously, I'll just give the usual cautions that everyone pays attention to, especially this time of year, in terms of having your facility in a proper state, right? Not just against hurricanes, but you want to look at all your other safety measures um, so that you minimize the risk of fire, flood, um, hurricanes, obviously, and so on. Because we tend to focus on a few things and ignore other areas, and not realizing that disruptions can come in many forms, right? So, do you have fire extinguishers in place? And how many extinguishers do you have? Where are the extinguishers located? Are they properly serviced? Is it the right type of extinguisher? Can people in your facility use the extinguisher properly? Are people aware of what to do when something happens? So we talk about things like also training and awareness of those in your facility as well is one of the mitigation areas or measure strategies for disruptions, right? So it's not just in the technology, it's not just in the relationships with your suppliers and so on, but also with the persons who are present in the facility operating on a day-to-day basis. Now, gonna move on to the next area, which is about lean and green methods. This is about waste elimination. How can we reduce waste? And just talk a little bit about some eco-friendly approaches, some green approaches to doing business, which can facilitate this agile way of doing business and operating as agro-processors in today's environment. So we're going to start with lean. I'm not sure how many of you know the terminology. We hear a lot about lean business, lean manufacturing, and so on. And lean and agile tend to be overlapped and used quite a bit in business worlds today. Now, lean is coming from really large industries. When we hear lean, a lot of us immediately think of Toyota, the automobile company who originated and developed a lot of techniques to improve their ability to make motor cars at a desired quality in desired numbers. And Toyota is famous for their reliability, um, for their efficiency, for their cost effectiveness, which is why the Toyota Corolla is one of the best-selling cars in the world from 19 how long, right? Lean has now been adapted across many industries in many situations, not just in manufacturing, but in service business as well. But obviously, it plays a very important part in any kind of manufacturing type operation for me. And so we want to talk a little bit about that. Now, ultimately, when we talk about lean, the ultimate mission is to remove waste from any process that we are engaged in. Industrial engineers have a saying, you would have heard, work smarter, not harder. And that really is coming from work in an efficient way and not in a way where the energy expend is wasted um, to a great extent. Now, how do we define waste? And lean defines and identify 8 areas of waste. But waste is defined as any action or step in a process that does not add value to the customer. In other words, waste is any process that the customer does not want to pay for. Jamaica would say is a waste of time. Them think they are waste. Nobody spend time on them because it's not adding no value, it's not moving you forward. And a lot of times it's costing you money. Right? So here the 8 areas of waste are defined as defects, which is where you have waste coming from something that does not meet customer expectation. It is below standard, doesn't meet the quality standard that you have set. You've made a product and the taste doesn't come out good. It goes bad before the due date. The packaging isn't done properly, and so on. Of course, with each of these ways, there are methods to analyze them and come up with solutions to eliminate them. Overproduction is seen as a waste, which goes against a lot of times we make stuff and put in inventory and hope someone will come and buy. But this is waste from making more products than customers demand. So we're touching into other areas of your business now. You need to understand the demand for your product. You need to have projections, make forecasts. So when you're planning production, you make the right amount of products using only the amount of resources needed, meaning only the right amount of raw material. You run the equipment for the right amount of time. You use the labor for the right amount of hours to make these products. However, on the flip side, overproduction is where you need to be agile and responsive so that when you do get the demand, you can supply the demand in the desired time required. Waiting is a form of waste. Waste from time spent waiting for the next process step to occur. So you have a process, you're making something, and you're waiting on the person ahead of the line to finish what they're doing, to finish chopping up the peppers to go into the kettle so you can start processing. You're waiting on the delivery of some bottles so you can start packing the product into the bottle. You can start filling, right? You're waiting on something to happen. Machine sits idle, you sit idle, nothing is coming out. That's wasted time. Unused talent, which is one of the newest area of waste that they identify in lean. Previously, there were 7 of them, but they realized that, hold on, unused talent is also waste. And this waste is from the underutilization of people's talent, skills, and knowledge. You may have somebody in your environment, in your business, who is brilliant at doing something, but you have them doing some else that don't add no value to the overall process. And they can help you to make things more efficient. They can bring new ideas, but you're not using them in that regard. Right? How can you use these skills to make your operation much better, to make it more efficient, right? To be able to add value to what it is being done. So it speaks to the human resource side of your business now for you to understand and know those who are in your um, within your organization who are working for you and how best to use their skills. Transportation can be seen as a waste. It's wasted time, resources, and costs when unnecessary moving products and materials. And here we think about transportation at different levels. It can be within the facility, moving it on a trolley or a flatbed truck or some other thing from one point to the next. Is it necessary to move it from point A to point B in the factory to do that? What value is being added there? Can things be done in such a way that you minimize that movement? Is it wasted time moving it from your place to somewhere else and then move it back to a third place and so on? Can we eliminate that second place that it went and move directly to your customers? And so on. So you want to look at that. Inventory we spoke about earlier as really being seen as a waste, but we spoke about situations where having some amount of inventory or work in progress, if you want to call it that, may solve another issue you may have in our situation. But inventory is resulting from having excess products and materials that aren't processed. And inventory sometimes is tied to overproduction, where you have too much of something sitting down, not being used, not being converted into a sale immediately. Motion is seen as waste at one level as well. And this is wasted time and effort related to unnecessary movements by people. So let's say you have a filling line and or a simple filling machine, and the person has to get up, go where the let's say a vat of your product is in there, and then they have to fill it up in a bucket and then go 2 feet to where the filler is and pour it in the thing and fill some bottles. When that is finished, they have to go back, fill another bucket, take 10 steps, 15 steps. What if you just had a direct connection from where you process the item in the vat, run a hose straight into the filling machine so the person don't have to be taking those 15 steps? You multiply those 15 steps times how many times you have to do it for the day, and you say, wow, all that distance and time has been wasted, right? And then the final area of waste that Lean looks at is extra processing. And this waste is related to more work or higher quality than is required. Are you putting too much into the product that isn't necessary, or the process, right? Spending 10 minutes wiping off um, extra run over each time you fill a bottle is waste. It's extra processing. Yeah, it's necessary to wipe it off because I don't want to have all of that residue on the outside of the bottle when it goes out and to your customer. But is that processing step necessary if the filling is done in such a way that you don't have that overfill and that run over, right? So you eliminate that extra step in the whole process, and you still come out with the desired quality of your product. So these are the 8 areas. So using some simple analogies to explain how they impact your system and your process. Um, Lean goes over also not just on the production floor, but in your administration and office operations as well, in terms of all your paperwork and processing that you do with your customers, how you manage customer orders, how you manage deliveries, etc. All these factors, or some of these factors, may come into play and when looking at waste. And why am I telling you all of this now? Because for us at JBDC, again, this is where we come in. We can come and work with you, help you to identify some areas of waste and develop some strategies in which you can eliminate or reduce some of these areas. Now, with Lean has many techniques to combat these different areas of waste. Um, Some of them are fairly sophisticated, some of them are easy to implement. We hear about things like even just in time um, for inventory management. We hear about um, things like Kanban. We hear about um, having visual displays, even having signs up in your place, giving simple instructions in clear ways is a form of lean to ensure that people understand what should be done, so they don't waste time or anything over processing or doing some other kind of things. I just pulled out two particular areas which I want to talk about today in the interest of time, which, and I like these two because they are easy to implement. They don't, well, sorry, the first one doesn't necessarily cost anything much, and it involves everyone. And this is the beauty about a lot of lean techniques that I like. They involve everyone in the facility, right? From the person doing the most menial task up to the most technical person in the facility. And 5S is the one that I like to champion and talk about whenever we talk to people about improving your operations. I like to start with 5S. And 5S really is about workspace optimization. And here it is said it is one of the foundations of Kaizen, which is another overarching lean principle. Kaizen is Japanese, which roughly translate to continuous improvement. You should strive for continuously improving how your operations are, striving for continuous improvement in efficiency, how efficient you do things, how you continuously look to eliminate waste from processes and your overall operations, right? And 5S comes from the name of 5 steps, which allow you or anybody in the organization to organize their workspace for maximum process efficiency. And the beautiful thing about 5S as well, it is what I call scalable or stackable. So it is done at the workstation level. This little 5 by 5 area that I'm responsible for, I go implement 5S here. And the 5S's mean sort, which is about how do you identify and organize things in such a way so that you can remove anything that is unnecessary. You're in an area, you have a desk in your place in a corner, and 10 million things are on the desk, and you can't find nothing, you can't find pen. You have 10 pen on your desk and none of them do right. You can't find the production sheet for the day because everything just throw down, right? You can't find anything. So you want to start with sort. Throw away what don't belong on the desk. Keep what is absolutely necessary because it is what you are going to use to do what you need to do, right? Put them in a particular order. So those things that you need to use frequently, they are closest to you. Those things that you don't need to use that frequently, you put them somewhere else, out of the way, right? So you start with sort, and sort going mean throwing away some stuff, literally, right? You run an area where you're doing processing and you have a old knife that never used from 2 years ago because the handle break, but you just refuse to throw it away. Get rid of it and keep all of the tools that you need to do what you're doing. You sort. Then you set in order, which is what I just mentioned a while ago. You arrange it in order for easy access, for access when you want it, for access in a sequential kind of way, and so on. So you organize the space now. Then you shine, which is about cleaning and ensuring that things again are in their place and you keep everything clean and functional, right? And clean means you literally wipe down the thing because keeping it clean can highlight if there are any issues with it. In the case of agro-processing here, cleaning is part of our GMP SOPs, right? But you want to shine, keep things clean, keep them orderly, and ensure that they are where they want to be. And then you standardize. This is where your SOPs come in because you want to develop routines of how you maintain or once you have sorted it or go back and add old stuff to it. Once you set in order, you arrange things in the way in which they arrange. You don't want to break that arrangement. Once you shine, you don't want no things to quote unquote dirty up again. You go back to the old way. So you standardize, you put SOPs and you change people's behavior to now start doing these things in these particular kind of ways as routine. And sustain means now you lock it in place. You make it a habit. You make the whole process become habitual and part of your day-to-day um, operation. Some things will require you to do these literally on a daily basis. So 5S will include things like and identifying who does it, who will clean up the facility at the end of the day, who takes out the garbage, how is it done, where does it go, right? What does it mean to clean up and take out the garbage? It means the wash bin have to wash as well and turn down. You don't just take out the garbage bag and throw the stuff, but you clean the bin. Who sweep up the floor? Who wipe up the floor? Where do you keep the mops? Right? Where you keep all the cleaning stuff. So literally things that we do on a day-to-day basis, we do it and we may not even think about it. It just becomes a kind of routine, habit that we don't put any thought to. But a lot of these are a part of what 5S is all about, right? So that everything remains in its place and it supports other area things that we do. So think of all the waste that can be eliminated by having a proper 5S system in place that everyone contributes to, right? So it eliminates quite a bit of the things that we spoke about earlier. It can help it to see where there are defects, right? It can help to minimize waiting. It can help, especially with motion and over processing and errors like that, having implemented a simple um, technique as 5S. So that's one of them that I strongly recommend that you start thinking of and looking at some areas where you may already be doing, but just start to you want to add the other steps to it and just make it complete and then you ensure that it's done consistently. The other area in lean that also makes a lot of impact and goes a little bit deeper in identifying where you can pick up quite a bit of waste is what we call value stream mapping. And what value stream mapping does, and it literally is about visualizing the flow of materials, information, and work required to deliver a product or a service. So it literally takes a bird's eye view and look at everything from it comes inside the facility, how it flows through and comes out. Obviously, you'll be looking at multiple things and how they impact on each other. So you look at the flow of materials through the facility. You look at the flow of your packaging material. It will look at the flow of documents throughout the facility, your production records, your sales orders, where they go from, they come in, who gets it, what do they do with it, and so on. And you look and you use that now to do several things. So Value stream mapping has four general steps. First is to map the current state. So you map things exactly how they are right now. Then you use that mapping to identify waste and inefficiencies. You look where things are not being done properly, where you have delays, where you have redundancy, you have non-value added step. Why is it that somebody have to take a paper, carry it to somebody else who just sign it and carry it back to the first person, and then that person do something with it, and that person who signed it in the middle, did they add value? Did they slow down the process? Why did they have to sign the paper? You look at little things like that that we take for granted. Sometimes you go some places and you see somebody do something. I always wonder when I go to the supermarket, some supermarkets, and I have my big bag full of things, and to go out the door now, the security guard look at my receipt, peeping at the bag, sign it, and make me go out. I was like, what's the purpose of that? Was there any value added there? So is that step necessary? Yeah, but them have to do it to make sure you not thief all the people and things and da 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 da. Is that the most efficient way of determining that if I'm shoplifting? So we see it in everyday life. All these things happening. Question them. What value are they adding? Right? So this is what lean teaches you to do, to really analyze all your systems. So once you identify all these areas of waste and inefficiencies, then you move now towards improving that. So you design for future state. You visualize how things should work. Okay, if I make these changes, eliminate these steps, eliminate these areas, or minimize the time spent in this area, change this flow, what should happen, right? This is the anticipated outcome. Then you implement those changes now that you had just redesigned, and you implement and improve. So you create an action plan. So the implementation is done in a very strategic and organized way. Persons need to be aware of what changes are going to happen, why are they going to happen, and who is responsible for them happening, or just being clear why they happen. No, because there are times when change is happening and nobody understands why they happen, and people resist the change or they revert to the old way of doing things, and it disrupts that change that you wanted, right? And of course, situations may change, so you may want to revisit and revise periodically the flows that you have, the systems that you have in your place, right? So this is what value stream mapping is about. Again, pushing the services that we have at JBDC here with our engineers and our food team. We can assist with things like that. We can come into your facility, look at areas, and one of the beautiful things sometimes when you have somebody coming from outside and looking at your thing with a clear third eye and unbiased third eye, we can pick up things easier sometimes than when you are in the thing and you're used to it working for you, so you don't see nothing wrong with it. And because things have to run through, you don't have time to think about how you can improve it necessarily, right? So we can assist you by coming in, looking at things, asking questions critically. Why is this done this way? Why don't you try this way? Look at your system, map it, and look at areas for improvement and assist you with that. Of course, with value stream mapping, it is more of an investment, both in terms of time and to make some of the changes may require resource changes or reallocation or addition of resources. It depends on what you see from your flow. There are some things that can be changed without any resource addition to the system. I always like to say with value stream mapping, one of the steps which aren't explicit in this, but is important, is about training. Training the persons involved in the process flow, train the persons who have a role to play so they can understand what their role is and how they should be doing it, and so on. Value stream mapping will lead to things like adjusting your SOPs and so on, right? So it requires a little bit more involvement and commitment from all involved. And so these are just two particular techniques in Lean that can be used to implement some changes. And these will support all the other efforts and activities that you would be doing that we spoke about earlier to be able to respond to disruptions, to be able to be a little bit more agile, to be able to um, pivot quickly when there are unexpected changes in situation and the environment for you. Right. So the last era coming up to rounding now or coming closer to the end, I'm just going to talk a little bit about some green business strategies. And again, realize these are not new. Some of them I've been talking about earlier and so on. But we recognize now that a lot of our customers and buyer preferences are shifting towards green and what they call ethically produced foods. Um, so people are watching more what they're consuming. They want to be assured by the inputs and the ingredients that go in there. They want to be assured by the process that we use to make our products and so on. And this is something that we should look towards and actively promote our products as green as we go along this path and so on, right? And some of the areas, just pick out three particular areas, there are other areas that I didn't talk about packaging in a great detail here, but that is also one of the things that pop up in mind when I think about introducing green to your business and so on, about biodegradable packaging and things of that nature, which I know is can be a bit challenging depending on what it is that you're doing and so on, and managing the cost to remain competitive and all of that. But some areas which are emerging that in the industry are things like closed loop logistics, where you work with vendors or persons who you distribute to and who retail your stuff to implement reusable um not just packaging, but your delivery systems, your shipping crates and bulk packaging systems, right? So you create a loop there, you create a cycle where instead of sending pallets each time that becomes destroyed and added to the landfill, they are recycled back into the system and reuse, which help to reduce creating waste, but also should reduce cost of your shipping costs and costs associated with logistics and so on. Of course, as our industry moves along, because a lot of these initiatives are industry-wide and not easily maintained by a single enterprise or entity, right? Looking at upcycling agricultural waste. We generate a lot of waste in our facilities. What do we do with them? Can we convert discarded fruit skins and crops and seeds and stuff into value added compost, pectin extracts, or livestock feed? Could become a revenue stream for you as well, right? As we move to, people are moving away from um, fertilizers which are inorganic, right? Can you create a system now that said compost is returned to the farmers who you buy stuff from for them to use in the production of their crops, right? We spoke about rain harvesting earlier, but having closed loop systems which feed into your own facility and so on, right? So practices such as these are becoming more emergent, are becoming more popular in areas. Consumers are now looking at businesses and making a determination who they want to support, who is, implementing some of these green practices. And there's a lot more, as time goes on, um, I'll have more to share on this as I myself am getting more, immersed into it and understanding how this type of ecosystem works. But this is just something for you to start thinking about how you can implement certain green strategies. And the thing about this as well, I don't have it here on a slide, but when it comes to even funding, there are financing entities who are now looking to fund green businesses who are implementing green strategies, right? And provide special funding to allow you to implement some of the systems that you need to put in place to ensure that you're practicing along the green spectrum. So this is a growing area, and I want to encourage you to learn some more about it and see what you can start now to put into your system. And I want to close, and as I said, didn't talk much about from the market side or anything here, but just to put a cap on it. And as we revise and we looked at ways in which we can now build our production systems to be a little bit more resilient, to be a bit more robust when it comes to having disruptions. Now, we know, again, using Hurricane Melissa or any major hurricane as the base, when we have disruptions, it cuts across the board, all sectors. So consumers are impacted, us, the producers are impacted, the markets are impacted, and so on. But to keep the ball rolling, we have to get back up and running. So we have implemented some of these strategies and we have minimized or avoid going down and we keep going. But how do we now ensure that our products are still going out when our primary customers have been impacted? And this chart really is just a representation. The percentages aren't necessarily real. It's just a scenario to show that really, if you're not yet, you should be looking towards having a diversified um, system or diversified channels of the market channels that you're actively participating in. And you want to optimize as much as possible. I know it will take a while for some of you to get to this point, but ensure that your distribution is in such a way that whenever one particular segment or more than one segment of the market is impacted negatively, you have other channels available to supply. In this particular chart, it shows the local market, export market, hotel and tourism, and direct e-commerce, which are some of the more popular channels that we would engage in, right? So let's set a scenario where typically your local market is about 40% of your sales. What happens if that is impacted? So you analyze and look now and see what strategies can I use to ensure that I supply the other um, channels are supported. We know we had a situation after Melissa, the tourism sector, the hotel and tourism side was severely impacted. A lot of hotels shut down, a lot of them stopped ordering stuff and things. So that left a big gap. How can I now re-strategize look at my capacity that I still have now, which segments can I still support to ensure continuity of business, to ensure that I remain operational and so on, right? This is going to be, I'm sure, Sam's a whole nother workshop to look at this area, and the marketing persons who are the better experts will go deeper into this area. But certainly at the end of the day, this is what you're aiming for once you have addressed the other areas that we discussed this morning, right? So in closing, you know where to turn to for help, but just going and reminding you, you have us here at JBDC who provide the support services, whether it's incubator rental, development of your product, market readiness, and business advisory, help you in all the technical areas, some of which we discussed, and we'll follow up for those of you who have put some queries out already. We have the regulatory organizations such as the Bureau of Standards, um, who ensures that our facilities and so remain compliant. And this is also important that regardless of the situation, regardless of any disruption, that we ensure that our facilities remain compliant so that we can respond quickly to the market without any issues at all. We have our parent ministry, Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, who can facilitate in many ways, including the productive input relief scheme that they have, which allows you as a small and micro manufacturer to access certain incentives in importing raw materials, equipment, and packaging solutions. It's done in conjunction with the customs department and allows you to bring in some stuff duty free and with certain other incentives. And of course, you have funding partners such as DBJ, etc., who have different financial products that we may turn to support us in getting back up after disruption. Right? So I'm gonna wrap up at this point now, Samsia, and open up for any questions and comments there. And I am turning to the chat.
Yes, thank you so much, Colin. Really, really insightful presentation this morning. I mean, I'm sitting here and I'm listening and I'm saying to myself, sometimes when we talk about, engaging with the technology that is now available in terms of helping us to be more efficient or more productive, it's just some really simple things that we need to do to start. If we don't have the machinery or the access to the machinery. I remember you talking about behavioral changes, things like changing from a fluorescent to an LED bulb.
Mm-hmm.
That's a simple, simple thing right
Yeah,
there.
it's simple, right?
Yeah,
I always like to say that, especially one of the presentations. Back when I was younger, I was like, why do I know nothing to teach anybody anything? But it's not about teaching, it's a constant reminder and reinforcements.
yeah.
And doing them in a systematic kind of way
Mm-hmm.
that result in some impact.
Right.
You change one bulb,
Absolutely.
you may not see the difference in the light bill. But as Sylvia earlier said, that running her washing machine during off-peak hours
Makes a major difference.
resulted in almost a 30% reduction in her energy usage,
Yeah, man.
right?
It's true.
So when we do it in a structured way, then that is when we see the impact, you know.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so she had a note in here as well. Manufacturers finding themselves with excess product can suggest use case scenarios to their customers, which they may not have thought of. This translates to new marketing focus slash techniques which can move inventory. We are long last
Long
we
past.
are long past the stage of creating a product and hoping for the best. or relying on past methods. Innovation and communication is the name of the game. Very important. So
Yeah, I was gonna
anything is
highlight that one for you
right.
because I thought it was a really good nugget that you shared right there.
Exactly, exactly.
Right.
You know,
And I
so
also want to highlight something else that you mentioned, the 5S: sort,
yes.
set in order, shine, standardize, and sustain. This is something that we do every day, you know.
Oh
And
yes, yes,
we
yes.
don't even know, we just never know that it was the 5S. You
Correct.
know, it is
Correct.
something that we do every day. So
Every
really,
day.
really informative and insightful presentation. I am not seeing any questions in the chat right now. So I am going to assume that everyone thought it was a really fantastic presentation. I see a picture being shared here. Let me see, 3 years and still cannot figure out how to use 36 hours of dry peppers machine from China. So this is
Yes.
apparently a case where somebody bought the machine from China. And
Mhm.
like you were saying, the instructions came in Chinese
Mhm.
and so you can't use it. A question here: is the facility at the JBDC incubator used for sampling?
When you say sampling, Shana, you mean making samples of products? Yes, we work with you to develop and do your
Yes, that's what
sample,
she means.
right? So to help you to fine tune your formulation and your process, the whole steps of making a product, we do that. The team will go as far as doing basic sensory evaluation to ensure that the outcome of that is successful, right? So we do that. So feel free to get in touch with us. We'll sit down and think. But before we do sampling, we tend to want you to have some things ready first. Have your formulation or recipe ready. Have a, let me call it a pre-sample. Have a sample of the sample ready so we can do an assessment, right? Of what you already have, talk you through the process, get to understand, more about you and the product and your process and so on. And then the team will work with you now to improve. And for us, it will go all the way down to making the recommendation to the most appropriate type of packaging to put the product in and to get a full product and things. So yes, we do. So feel free to reach out to us.
Colin, there is another question in the chat. John
Mhm.
Myers is asking, when is the incubator going to put in place facilities for processing castor oil?
Mr. Myers, sorry to disappoint you, but the short answer I'm going to give you is we're not going to consider castor oil at all. Primarily not because we don't want to do it. We wish we could. It's a combination of different things, including um, space constraint, but because we do processing of foods, we have to be we have to make that separation. And as you know, there are certain factors in doing castor oil which makes it challenging to do it in an area where food is also done. So unfortunately, we won't be able to, or we're not thinking of castor oil. No, we don't have enough space that would be able to allow us to separate it enough from where food is done and the processes. So
Okay.
unfortunately, it's off the table for us.
All right. So I've placed in the chat, ladies and gentlemen, the JBDC website, two of our email addresses, and the contact number for the JBDC Incubator Center. I encourage you to just make a note of those, reach out to the team at IRC, and they will be more than happy to assist you with, the product that you are developing at the moment. And as Mr. Porter indicated, we do have an incubator. We have essential oils, we have the agro-processing, cosmeceutical coming on stream very shortly. We have also fashion and our artisan hub. So we cater to entrepreneurs, whichever area they are involved in. We want to thank you, Colin, for joining us on the virtual biz zone this morning and for sharing such insightful information. Both sessions, both this one and the one 2 weeks ago when you were really, really sick, and then we were interrupted by
Oh, God.
power cut. Yes.
Oh, boy.
We were interrupted by a power cut, but both sessions have really, really, really been good. I want to remind everyone that the sessions were recorded. The last one was recorded, so is this one, and it is available on our YouTube channel. This one should be up by Friday. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
And it was my pleasure presenting to you. And as Sansa said, reach out to us if you need assistance, and the team will definitely respond to you.
Thank you so
Have a
much.
good day, everyone.